I'll just do my hairstyle and my beard and we'll be laughing.
Stewart, you're looking good.
Gonna have a quick shave.
You're looking good.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks. Okay.
Welcome to Poulstone Retreat and Meditation Center, and thank you for joining us in this series of What Connects Us All. And today I am joined by Stewart Gilchrist, and he's the founder of East London School of Yoga. He's a very well known yoga teacher in London. He's a senior registered yoga teacher. His emphasis is on breath, vinyasa, and philosophy. He studied many disciplines, including Ashtanga and Jiva Mukti. He's appeared on TEDx London Business School, and I think that was a couple of years ago. And it's excellent, really worth looking at if you want to explore breath and pranayama. And part of his thing is that he sees ahimsa as a political activism. So East London School of Yoga supports various organizations such as Peace Pledge, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, Greenpeace, and the list goes on. And I suppose my first question to you is, tell us something about yourself and what brought you to yoga.
Well, it's a bit like when you get asked in meetings, why are you here and what's your, why are you doing this course? Give us a bit about your background and why are you doing this course? I really came across it by accident, Raj. I was pretty much a big party person. I was into raving and I was into clubbing and parties and MDMA and ecstasy and club culture, and I'd been brought up in that sort of psychedelics and punk rock from '76 onwards. And one day I was coming home from a music venue in North London on Belsize Park, and I decided to take a shortcut, and I jumped over the wall and I fell 40 feet onto the Camden Canal towpath and hit some scaffolding on the way down. And I wasn't drunk. I was a bit drunk, but I wasn't drunk. I was a little bit stoned, a little bit drunk, but not terribly. And so I ended up in Royal Free Hospital for quite a while, and with a quadruple fracture and compression of the spine. And I wasn't doing much walking for a while. So I spent a lot of time and I spent a bit of time in intensive care. Then I spent a bit of time recovering in a wheelchair and getting my legs back. And I eventually got out and was a bit lost. So I just resorted to drugs and recreational painkillers along with other painkillers. And I ended up not in a great way. Ended up in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. So when I realized the drugs didn't work that well, recreational or prescribed, I decided to start trying meditation, Qigong, Tai Chi, and I went through yoga classes, and I didn't really like them that much. So they didn't really give me much. I always went back to alcohol and drink and drugs and back on that pain-killing wagon. And then someone, my girlfriend at that time, I'm sorry, my girlfriend now of 22, 23 years, she used to go to Ashtanga. And I used to say, you go there 6 times a week. Why do you go 6 times a week? Do you not want to spend time with me? I'm your boyfriend. You're meant to be with me. And she goes, no, I'll go to my Ashtanga every day and I do the practice. Why don't you come? And I was like, nah, I've got a broken back. I'll never do what you do in Ashtanga. Ashtanga Vinyasa Mysore is just not happening for me. And so she eventually took me to these 2 women, Jennifer and Sibel in Brixton. And that was 23 years ago. And I've practiced every day since, I think, every day that I could practice. And I started with those simple vinyasa krama from Pattabhi Joyce and Krishnamacharya. And I just got hooked. I gave up alcohol, I gave up drugs, I gave up partying. I became quite devoted to my practice. My sadhana started, it evolved, my quest started, and it evolved from just the physical looking at the moral and ethical principles of it, to Antaratman, to this more developed practice, this innermost quest, which is where I am now, which is starting to bring a benevolence to me after years. I'm still a beginner, I'm still learning, and I think I'll always be a beginner. Some of the people I know that teach have taught for 40, 50 years, and I'm just at the beginning, but and that's how I got there, totally by accident. And I went through lots of different career things in between, from teaching and law, until I just eventually went to India and decided all I wanted to do was teach what had helped me, and what had helped me works, and I knew it worked. So that's what I tried to teach, what worked for me. And that led me into different parts of Vedanta, of Samkhya, of different philosophies from India. And that's where I am now, halfway through postgraduate studies, on the way hopefully to a PhD in my chosen topic. And that's what I'm working on now at the present.
That's a great journey. Now, tell me, you said, you talked about sadhana, your practice, and once you went, you got hooked. You just started doing a daily practice. Did you know what it was that hooked you, so to speak? What was it that about sadhana that you couldn't let go of?
In retrospect, I know exactly what it was. It was the similarity that it had to LSD and hallucinogens that I'd taken when I was younger. It gave me that feeling of freedom that I'd only ever experienced when I was practicing, be it pranayama, japa mantra, asana, mostly asana at first, obviously. Whether it was endorphins or whether it was some psychochemical reaction in my brain, it just reminded me of the peaks of my drug experiences. And I was a recreational drug user, but I was also a philosophical drug user. I recognized quite young that LSD had a profound effect change in your mind. And not many people in Europe had that. That was more an American thing. But I took to studying what's called entheogens, and I took to studying very early on, like usage of DMT, ayahuasca. This is maybe 1981. I started with ayahuasca when I went to South America. So I had a cognizance of what that liberation through plants felt like. And my sadhana gave me the same feeling. Not so strong, but it lasted. It lasted. And that's why I trust it so much. And I always tell people who are big drug users, do asana, do pranayama, do japa mantra, do dhyana, because you'll get the exact same benefits as you get from all the drugs you take, but it's just slower and it's longer lasting. And that samadhi, that instantaneous Zen samadhi will come to you the same way you got when you took drugs. That's exactly why I got addicted.
I don't take drugs, but I have read a couple of books, one quite recently called How to Change Your Mind, about LSD, about shrooms, and I know Johns Hopkins University doing a lot of studies about this now. It's now taken on more serious. It's taken, I suppose, it's taken now more seriously by the scientific community. But what was it about your sadhana that you preferred over drugs?
Well, because I'd started with the external, with the physical self and the purity of the body. I realized when I heard phrases from Mr. Iyengar and other teachers that your body was a temple, and the body had to be pure before you could progress with your sadhana. I decided I became almost instantaneously became a raw food vegan. I'd been a vegan for a while anyway, but a vegan who drank. And almost at the same time, I became a raw food vegan, 100% organic. Really, that idea of the purity of the temple. You've got one body, and you've got to, just the things that were in my mind from the raw food education that I'd had, from the nutritional education, and then alongside the teachings of probably Mr. Iyengar, having that phrase in your mind, your body is a temple, your body is a temple, and then discovering that the various stages of sadhana. The first one is cleanliness and purity, and then studying Hinduism and seeing how that related in Hindu philosophy as well, that the body had to be pure. And so that sort of just fell into place for me. And I didn't have any trouble giving up drugs. I've never had any trouble giving up things. I don't have to go to AA, or I don't have to go alcoholic. I don't have to go to any therapist or anything. I can just stop my attachments quite quickly. Takes a few days, a few months. You're never quite free of some of them, but I think just integrating that concept of purity and cleanliness and social, of internal social in my body, really helped me with that process. So I never had to go through CBT or NLP or AA or all those other acronyms that just sound as if they're made up by people who need a job in psychotherapy. I just used yoga, and that worked.
Use the first Niyama Sutra.
Yeah, exactly. Santosha, use the yamas and niyamas, and that helped, Raj. That was what helped.
You are now doing a master's at SOAS on is it yoga philosophy? What's the title?
It's called Traditions of Yoga and Meditation. So it includes Buddhist philosophy, Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Jainism, origins of yoga, and then I think I'm doing ancient Indian philosophy and modern Indian philosophy.
Well, this qualifies you partly to answer this question. It's a broad question, but nevertheless, let's see where we go with this. What is yoga, Stewart?
Whatever you want it to be. It's like Dharma, it's like Hinduism, it's like all the words spirituality, religion. You can't really define yoga. If you look up Monier Williams, there's 100 definitions at least. Yep. So I think we all have our own individual take on it. And I think that's the beauty of it. The same way you can't define Dharma. I'm sure from Patrick Olivelle to other great academics who have studied the Upanishads and studied the philosophy of yoga, they've never quite been able to harness what Dharma means. They've never quite been able to harness what yoga means. And I'm sure yoga means something completely different for a Jain who strives for ayoga, as it does for a Brahmin, as it does for a Buddhist, as it does, where they're all, yoga's all common to all these traditions, but it means different things for different people. And I'm pretty sure your definition of yoga might be slightly different from mine. The one you get at primary school, the yoking and the union, is quite naive. And I think Westerners don't get much further than that generally, but I'm compiling a book that I'll probably ask you for a contribution to, and it's 108 definitions of yoga. I've got an artist who's drawn me 108 modern mandalas, and I'm going to compile them all in a book called 108 Definitions of Yoga. And I've got some very, very and profound definitions to some very simplistic and humorous ones. My favorite at the moment is yoga is your best friend. I like that one. That was from an artist, not a yogi.
So what's your definition of yoga?
It changes. It ranges from a means by which you can perceive reality to something that can help you deal with pain in your daily life. It's a means by which you can handle pain. You're lucky I've got one of my notebooks here, so I do write them down quite regularly. So Atta Tattva Darshana Vyayupya. Yoga is the direct means to perceive reality, from Brahma Sutya Abhyasa. I like that one. Occasionally, and then it will change. Yoga dissolves the state in which my problems exist. Yoga's learning to live. This was the one that kept me going at first. Yoga, and still does today when I get pain. Yoga is learning to live with discomfort. That one got me through lockdown. So when I couldn't go on my bike every day and I was stuck in Walthamstow walking around the forest every day, the ones that got me through, I wrote some of them down in my wee book, and I've compiled them all in my other computer. So I've got a good 200 or 300 definitions, of which I'm trying to get 108 from. If you've got one, actually email me one now. And
well, no, the one that I like, it's straightforward and it's done me well. It's yoga is a complete mastery of the roaming tendencies of the mind.
Yeah.
It doesn't confine me to one discipline like asana or meditation. It is all about using life to actually give
a complete mastery of the roamings, of the fluctuations of the mind.
Yeah, the roaming tendencies of the mind, but it's the complete mastery.
Roaming tendencies, yeah.
And that's taken from The Secret of the Yoga Sutra by Pandit Rajmi Tiganayat.
One of the ones I always remember is, I don't know if it's specifically a definition of yoga, but it's something that I've had to bear in mind because I can be very outspoken. I'm Scottish and I can be very argumentative, as you know, if you're trained in law and you have that rights of audience, yeah, and you have the ability to speak, you want to be able to argue your point, whatever the point may be. And I always remember Manu Smriti, Shankara quotes Manu, and he says, let him not speak what is true but unkind. Let him speak what is kind and not untrue. This is eternal righteousness. This is Dharma. Yeah. And so I always speak my mind, and hopefully it's true.
Well, Ahimsa and non-violence, it's a Yamma, the first Yammas, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And how do you see Ahimsa as political activism?
Well, going from the premise that it's not just non-violence and it's non-harming, and therefore, as the adepts know, that it's something a bit more than non-harming. It's sentient beings. It's actually your thoughts, and it's actually your words as well as your actions. So I think it starts with most people with their actions. So I've been studying it a lot from a Jain point of view, and as you know, the Jains are the ultimate, supposedly the ultimate practitioners of Ahimsa, but I have a bit of a controversial disagreement with Jains about their use of ghee, but that's another matter. But going to the ghee argument from the Delhi cows is one extreme, which even I can find myself more extreme than a Jain, being an active vegan and an animal rights activist, which I have been for many years, from anti-vivisection to hunt saboteurs to campaigns that have been run over the last 40 years in Britain. And I think using non-violent civil disobedience, satyagraha, I also have another sort of moniker, which is Satyagraha Yoga. I run Satyagraha Yoga, and Satyagraha Yoga is obviously based on the teachings of Satyagraha from
Mohandas
Gandhi. And Satyagraha Yoga has got three founding concepts. One is Ahimsa, one is Satya, and the other is Tapas. So I think those three go together. And I put those together under an umbrella of Satyagraha Yoga maybe 20 odd years ago, when I thought I was clever enough to start my own yoga. My girlfriend soon told me not to be so arrogant, so I never bothered. But I started with Satyagraha Yoga, and the first principle I had was Ahimsa. So to put it into a politically active way, that requires a degree of non-violent civil disobedience. That requires a certain degree of activism about how you live your life and the Dharma that's involved in following. This isn't a modern trendy thing. I've been actively involved in veganism for over 25, 30 years. So it's not something I've jumped on. In fact, I'm quite embarrassed by the bandwagon that's now taking place in veganism. It's the same as being a yoga teacher almost, or it used to be the same as being a DJ. If you were a DJ, everyone was a DJ. Now everybody's a yoga teacher. Now everybody's a vegan. And it's not from jumping on a bandwagon. It was from a real deep concern for animal welfare. That's why I started being a vegan and practicing animal rights and practicing Ahimsa. And then I realized that there was human rights as well. And I started thinking a lot. The first action I ever did was on a nuclear submarine in the Holy Loch in 1976, 77. And we chained ourselves to a nuclear submarine as part of a CND action. It wasn't quite CND, we were a bit too radical for CND. But then I realized that it extended to humans as well. And the logical progression of that was the support of people like CND, but a bit more extreme, a bit more active. So like Earth First, like the campaign against the arms trade, which I'm a big supporter of.
Yeah.
And I realized that there should be this abolitionist. It used to be about in the 60s. I always remember it from the yoga teachers in the 60s, my sister's friends. And they always talked anti-war because Vietnam was big at that time and all the yoga teachers were anti-Vietnam War. And then it seemed to disappear from yoga teaching. And I thought, well, why don't yoga teachers, why are they not teaching the abolition of all weapons of any type? Surely if you're a yoga teacher, the first thing you should strive for is the abolition of all weapons. Get rid of weapons. And you would think that's a logical place to start, but it's not very popular with modern postural yoga teachers. They're not really, they're probably quite happier with cruise missiles and the ability to carry a gun in America. So for me, that would be a logical place to start.
Do you think one of the defining parts of the East London School of Yoga is the political activism that you've undertaken now?
Me personally, yes, but at the moment I am East London School of Yoga myself. I've got a couple of people, 3 or 4 people who help me. And when I do my teacher trainings, I've got an anatomist, a Sanskrit teacher, and they're all basically they're either very sympathetic towards my views, or they all practice the same practice as I do. It's very common now, veganism is almost 1% of the population. When I started, there was 100 vegans in Britain.
So here's what I'm kind of seeing broadly. That so before that, in one sense, you were always a yogi because there was an activism in you even prior to a disciplined approach to sadhana, which you started.
I wasn't very peaceful.
And it seems you've somehow taken that part of your life into also your yoga life and molded it into everything else that you was taught about sadhana, and that's what it appears. So let's start talking about the schools of yoga that you started with. So you mentioned Ashtanga and Jivamukti. Can you tell us something about Ashtanga first, and then Jivamukti, and then the other schools that you followed?
I was initiated into Jennifer Dale and Sibel Tiam were two. They were the first Black women in Europe to own a yoga studio, and they were the first Black women to teach Ashtanga, probably in the world. And they were my teachers. They were both one from Switzerland, one from Brixton. And from them, I quickly graduated to a guy called Hamish Henry. And John Scott started Ashtanga London, and then he gave it to Hamish Henry. So Hamish Henry taught me from when I was a beginner, along with Jennifer and Sibel. And their teacher was Sri K. Patabi Joyce from Mysore. So the parampara, the lineage went to Krishnamacharya, Yogacharya Krishnamacharya.
I think most traditions do go back to Krishnamacharya anyway.
Yeah, and then I've now traced it back to the 9th century. So Krishnamacharya's lineage is traced to the 9th century. And when I started, it had just become super trendy. In America, it had just really taken off because a lot of Americans had been to Mysore. A lot of Americans had befriended, from David Williams, David Svensson, Nancy Gilgoff, David Life and Sharon Gannon. A lot of them had befriended the Joyce family and had become very close to them. And the same with some of the teachers that were in London. So I basically started self-practicing 4 or 5 every morning.
Wow.
Primary series, Ashtanga. Started at the very beginning, and I think I kept going for about 12 years daily. Then I was very dogmatic. I was very, this is the one that helped me. This is the one that helped my back. This is the one that got me out of there. This is the only true yoga. Well, there only is Ashtanga. Do Ashtanga Vinyasa Mysore. And I was so narrow-minded, and I was so closed to other types of yoga. I didn't let anything else in. I was just studying that type of yoga, doing that practice every day, and then go and being a lawyer after it, go and do, you know, go to court, go and do my work, go and get up in the morning. And then I realized when I gave it up and went to India that there was a lot more to yoga than Sri Patabi Joyce and Ashtanga Vinyasa Mysore. So I started opening up my horizons a little bit, broadening my mind and broadening my perspective. Went to live in America, went to stay in Hawaii, stayed in California, lived in New York, trained as a Jiva Mukti teacher with David and Sharon in New York. This is like 20 years ago. And they are animal rights activists, so we played off each other. They're very into ahimsa, they're very into animal rights, and they were sort of, I knew of them before. I knew from 1982, I knew David had a cafe, and I knew Sharon was politically active in Brooklyn. So I knew who they were before they were yogis. So I practiced with them for a while, and then went and trained with them, became one of the teachers, stayed in Brooklyn for a while, and then came back and started teaching Jiva Mukti, probably one of the first people to teach Jiva Mukti in Britain. And there's a great emphasis on animal rights and veganism and political activism in Jiva, which is why I was attracted to them. Wow. But same with that, I just realized after 7 or 8 years of that, I realized that when people said to me, what type of yoga do you teach? What type of yoga do you do? What type of yoga? I was like, I only teach yoga. There only is one type of yoga. Yeah. And they would be a bit dumbfounded by what I said, because they wanted me to say, oh, I'm a Kundalini teacher, I'm a Ashtanga teacher, I'm a Jiva Mukti teacher. And I just kept on saying to them, look, yoga is a state. You'll all get to that state. Okay, and there's only one state, and it's called yoga. How you get to it might be other yogas, but I teach yoga. I teach people to get to that one state of yoga. Mm. And whatever yogas you use to get there, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jiva mukti yoga, ashtanga yoga, that's up to you. But what I teach is yoga. So I said to all the studios, I don't want to be a vinyasa teacher. I don't want to be a flow teacher. I don't want to be a Jiva Mukti teacher. I just want to teach yoga. Right. And they let me teach yoga now. And so I do yogasana and yoga.
Yeah. So let's look at just the discipline of Ashtanga and this discipline of Jiva Mukti. So there is Jiva Mukti had again, they had political activism. Just as a discipline, what's the difference between one compared to the other? Just as a discipline?
Not much at all. Okay. Not much. David and Sharon were very clever. They're very clever, astute business people. David had a successful business before he was a yoga teacher. Sharon was a successful musician. Yeah. And what they did was they knew Ashtanga was really popular. So they took Patabi Joyce as one of their gurus. So they had 3 gurus. They still have 3 gurus. Yeah. So when we were in Mysore, we used to go to an ashram, and it was run by a guy called Swami Niramalanda. Swami Niramalanda is the silent guru. He stayed silent for 30 years. He was also known as the anarchist guru. And he lived in the Chamundi Hills in an ashram outside Mysore. So we used to all go there because you could go and take mushrooms and smoke a joint and be naked and do what you wanted, because he let you do what you wanted to do. Sharon was very clever. She took Sri Patabi Joyce, Swami Niramalanda, and Sri Brahmananda. Sri Brahmananda owns Brahmananda Ashram in California and in the Catskills, north of New York. That's where Sharon and David learned a lot from the teachers in Brahmananda Ashram. So they didn't just take one guru, they took 3. So they sort of encompassed a lot of people like me and people who had come across Swami Niramalanda. I loved Swami Niramalanda. He was a fantastic man. He broke his silence at Jiva Mukti after 30 years and died very shortly after. He practiced Mauna for 30-something years, and he was a really, really loving man. And he wrote a beautiful book called A Forest of Flowers, or A Garland of Flowers. There's 2 or 3 books. And so I loved the idea of having these three. Swami Brahmananda was Dr. Mishra, who wrote textbook on yoga psychology, which is an excellent take on Patanjali.
Yeah.
And he was a quantum physicist. He was a physicist. So he was very technical scientifically. So that appealed to a lot of people like me. So they acquired a big following because of their choice of gurus.
Yeah.
Which is very astute and very clever. Whereas Pattabhi Jois was the main guru, and you know what's happened to Pattabhi Jois, and some of us knew that was happening at the time, and we were all very wary of it. And even the most prominent figures within Ashtanga, his grandson knew about it, and he didn't do anything about it, which is one of the reasons a lot of people didn't stay for very long. Even in my very first visit to Mysore, that came up. And then nothing really happened until Me Too. So they were very astute to follow those, to create a discipline, but there's not much different. There's not much different in the founding principles of Jiva Mukti as there is in Ashtanga Vinyasa Mysore.
When did you start doing a proper, sitting down practice as part of your yoga sadhana?
Not for a while. Ashtangis weren't very, very good at sitting. Even today, when I teach Ashtangis, I know they're Ashtangis because it'll get to the end and it'll be like Shavasana. They'll struggle with 10 minutes Shavasana and then 20 minutes sitting, hard work. It took me maybe, I don't know, I remember a guy called Danny Paradise saying to me once, don't be in a rush, it'll take you 10 years to start getting it. And I went back and said, thanks for that. I'm into it 10 years now and I'm just starting to get it. And it wasn't almost 10 years, but it was quite a long time before I got out of the jiva, the embodied soul stuff, and moved from the embodied self into something a little bit more cerebral and a little bit more antaranga sadhana, moving into something more pranayama and pratyahara. And that took a while, definitely.
I do a sitting down meditation practice, have been for decades now. And I still feel like I know nothing. And, it's just great because I feel like a child. And I still feel as if I'm in awe when I find myself in my practice, and I'm still in awe because I realize there's so much little that I know, and there's so much more to live for. There's so much more reason to do practice because I know nothing. And so I'm like so when I move into my practice, I'm like a child in a toy shop. It's just, I just, my God, I'm just lost in awe, and that's just great. It's lovely to be a child in practice, actually.
I'm pretty similar. I have very similar experiences, definitely.
And when did your kind of meditation practice start? Taking more seriously your meditation practice?
Probably about 4 or 5 years into Ashtanga, when I realized it takes about 3 years to do primary series. And I was so fixated on finishing primary series that it was all physical and breath and vinyasa, how you moved and transitioned in the postures, and my head was constantly working. But you're actually meditating when you're moving, which is a weird experience, I still teach today. I teach moving meditation, and it becomes very effortless. The way Patanjali says it, the asana, the still practice becomes effortless. Well, the vinyasa becomes effortless as well when the body becomes a nature to it. So it becomes like a second nature. And even in the moving meditation, I had found that quite simple. And then I realized I had to learn to sit still. And that took me about 4 or 5 years before I could sit still for 20 minutes, half an hour. And then I'd time it 20 minutes twice a day. And then I'd start with 20 minutes twice a day and see if I could do that. And it wasn't easy at first because, as you say, it's playing, and you're just flabbergasted as to what the mind can actually do when you sit still. And to bring it to some sort of inactivity, as you say, it can be very, it can take away all your ego and make you seem as if you know nothing at all. For a big-headed Scottish person, that's quite hard. So
Well, I think it's quite insightful how
it is definitely
yeah,
Vipassana.
really,
It's
yeah,
Vipassana. That's what it is. It's just insight. It's compassion. It's vinyasa. It's Vipassana, and being insightful, being what's been bastardized as mindful, Smriti, and that concept of recollection and remembrance and memory, and the true meaning of Smriti, and not what modern mindfulness is presented as with. I don't quite get modern mindfulness. I'm not a great fan of either the man who's promoted it, whether it's Dr. Williams or the main protagonists within CBT. Mindfulness stress-based reduction therapy, or mindfulness CBT, Mark Williams. I'm not a great fan. I think I'm more interested in the original Theravada Buddhism and the meditation on Smriti, as it means recollection and remembrance, and learning to work with the mind that way. And so that integration of mainstream Buddhism with yoga really helped me. I had a little bit of experience with Buddhism before I started Ashtanga. Like, I really fell in love with a girl who was a Buddhist, so I went to all the Buddhist meetings. So I've been introduced to it before on a very sort of I scratched the surface.
Well, here's the thing. So I speak to many people. In fact, I've interviewed some, and when I talk about yoga, they just see yoga as a pure physical discipline. And when they see Buddhism, when they think of meditation, they automatically, or people generally think about Buddhism rather than yoga as meditation. What do you say about what yoga has to offer to the art of meditation?
Well, funnily enough, you should mention that, because at the moment I'm looking into complex asanas and hatha yoga and the way it developed. And the development of it comes from Buddhism. It comes from Vajrayana Buddhism. It comes from the Tantras. And this sort of crossover where even if you're sitting still in meditation, you're using your body. It's still an embodied practice. The Buddha tells you before you start meditating, whether it's open presence meditation, 4 jhanas, whatever type of Mahayana Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism or Vipassana, the first thing they do is tell you how to sit.
Yeah.
So it has to be embodied, doesn't it? It's physical at first. You don't sit like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first instruction in the Nikaya and in the ancient Buddhist text is it explains perfectly how to make your space, doesn't it? You know, choose what to sit on, choose to sit under a tree, choose to sit in a certain place, make the spine nice and erect, maybe seal the hands, whatever the instructions are. It's embodied to start with, isn't it? It has to be. And that I found really interesting, because
that must be right.
I realized after a while I didn't even get the first bit right. You know, I was sitting like,
I
was sitting like this. You know, and I was like, oh my God, that doesn't work. You've actually got to be strong to sit there for a long period of time. If your body is sickened and firm and weak, you won't be able to sit for very long, which is why the Hatha Yoga, why the Vajrayana Buddhism and the Tantra that developed Hatha Yoga was really beneficial, even though Hatha Yoga is not usually associated with meditation. It's it might be one of the precursors that Patanjali is talking about, the ability for the body, and now yoga begins. It might be maybe the body's ready for yoga.
Well, you know, it's again interesting that in Patanjali's Ashtanga yoga, you have asana, pranayama, and then and so forth, and asana is the first one. It's the first rung. And of course, people see asana as a yoga asana, but asana also means your seat.
It's a still posture. Yes, still that translation is still posture.
Yeah, and asana is a sitting posture. So it's saying that you need to be able to sit. How do you learn how to sit? Well, actually, you start understanding your body and how to.
In the Vyasa, in the Vyasa of Patanjali, there's there's actually 6 sitting postures explained how you can sit.
Yeah.
From swastikasana, siddhyasana, sukhasana, padmasana, hapadmasana. So he actually does explain in the, you know, there's a lot of consternation amongst academia at the moment whether the author of the Vyasa and Patanjali are the same person. So it could be Patanjali wrote his own commentary, and in the commentary he said that asana was a still posture.
Yep.
And then you have Satiram Sukham Asana. Yep. The posture should be steady and easeful. But there's also this connection with the commentary where you actually have description of how you can sit still. And for me, the crux of that is a way back in Shamanic traditions, way back to the Ajivikas and the Brahmins and the ascetics, the renunciants. It's all to do with inactivity. Yeah. It's all to do with being still. Stilling the mind, stilling the body. The asana should be a still posture. The mind should be free from, I forget your description, your interpretation, free from the fluctuations.
Master of the roaming tendencies of the mind.
Stuart. That's the one. I've got it written down. Don't worry. So that's got to do with inactivity. And as you know, the Jains, the Ajivikas, the Buddha, they all dealt in the same thing, inactivity. And I find that really interesting that it goes way back. And people say yoga never, there's no mention of yoga in the Vedas, there's no mention of yoga in the Acharanga, there's no mention of yoga in the Nikayas or the Vinayas. Of course there is. Of course there is. And all the modern academics at SOAS and Harvard and in Austria and Switzerland, they say, oh, no, this is where it comes from. They didn't mean yoga. Well, the long-haired Keshan meant yoga when he talked about his breath in the Veda, in Rig Veda. And then for me, that's really fascinating, that concept, because the oral tradition takes you way back before the philologists. And that oral tradition, as we said the other day on the phone, how long does that go back? 10,000 years, 15,000 years? You know, put a number on it at your leisure. So I find that really interesting. Right, you know, I'm going to have to go soon.
I know, but before you do, I'm going to ask you 2 very quick questions, because the first one goes to really this point about this oral tradition. So you have Krishna to your left there, and is that Buddha? Is that Buddha?
Yeah, Buddha's there, Krishna's there. Yeah,
it's great, and I love seeing that actually.
Yeah, Bhagavata Purana is the text I'm working on now. It might take me a couple of lifetimes, but I've started on Bhagavata Purana. And Ishvara Krishna, different Krishna, but Ishvara Krishna and Samkhya. Started in those 2 texts. I'm halfway through Bhagavata Purana. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Learning about Vishnu and learning about the incarnations and the avatars of Vishnu. And
well, if I have the good fortune of knowing that I'm going to die soon, the one text that I will read, or have read to me, is the Bhagavad Puran. You know, the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is the book, because I think the starting point is, I'm going to die in 7 days. What shall I do? Shall I do meditate? Shall I do some yoga? No, read the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's it.
I was going to start in Vishnu Purana, and I was going to start in Skanda Purana, because I thought they were more relevant to where my head was at the time. But I was in Rishikesh, and I was at Nikatan Paramat Ashram, and I bought a copy from the bookshop, the Gopi books, the books that are like 50 rupees. They always have stalls of them. I bought it there, the biggest hardback, the whole 120 rupees, and I was just fascinated every single moment of the day. I was fascinated. They are so vivid and so colorful, and much better than any hallucinogenic drug I've ever taken in my life. Just reading.
You're completely right. It takes you to all these ashrams, takes you to rishis, takes you to all these wonderful stories. I mean, it's a great kind of feast for the imagination.
I used to say to my Indian friends, "What is this? This is just like." This is like all those images you see in stalls in India of all these phantasmagorical hallucinogenic visions. They're all in the Bhagavata Purana. You're reading it and it's just like eye candy.
Yet very, very profound, because, for example, the roots of Sankhya, they talk about where Sankhya comes from. They talk about so many philosophies and where they come from in this amazing book. Now, before you go, final message on unity. What's your message on unity?
I think even now more than ever, the only way that people can come together, and I mean everyone, not just the higher echelons of power in this world. This is almost a Marxist saying, okay? But I think there's a great demand for community, from communitarianism, what the old people would call socialism, what the old people might have called communism, as taught by Marx and Engels and not by Stalin and Lenin and Mao. But I think there's a great deal for that unity, that resurgence of that communitarian. The only word I could use is communitarianism without being politically sketchy. But I think there's a great need for communitarianism now, especially when we're going into one of the biggest economic crises that we'll ever experience. And we're really going to need community to pull us through, whether it's in education, housing, work, finance, business, even the pubs today. They said they were giving 150 million for people to own their own pubs. As much as I hate pubs, at least the pubs were going to be owned by the people. Yeah. And maybe that's one thing that might change because of lockdown. Much more community, much more realization that we don't need big business, we don't need high tech, we need different search engines. We've got one, Ecosia, use it, don't use Google, use different search engines, use different bits of software, don't use WhatsApp, use other non-profit, non-hierarchical solutions, and they're going to be there now. They're there already. You've just got to promote them, and then we'll get more unity, more community. We've got to go, Raj.
Thank you, Stewart.